welcome to the first ever episode of Hoop Theory. My name is Logan Wortman. Hello to the audio-only listeners, and also hello to those of you watching the video version on YouTube. I originally recorded this episode a little over a week ago now, but since I'm new to the whole video thing, recording and editing, it's taken a lot more time and energy than I had at my disposal this past week, so it's been really hard to get productive in editing video and stuff like that, mainly just because I suck at it. Originally, I really wanted to do a lot with the editing, like throwing up a video on the screen, maybe of like a play that I'm referencing or talking about, or especially like just images of people and people's names and stuff like that when I'm referencing them. Just because I know there's people that are going to be watching the videos that don't know like a ton about the NBA and stuff. They're more just so watching it because they know me. So I thought it'd be a good idea to do stuff like that. But I honestly am just so tired of working on this episode at this point, and I just want it to be done. Mainly just because it's not something that was really on my to-do list of things to do for the podcast and things to do for this show moving forward. Not really a part of my whole like overall plan of what I want to cover, what I want to make content about. It was kind of just like a spontaneous sort of topic and thing that came up, and I was like, you know, I'll just do the first episode about this. But it's not worth like dragging it out this long and pushing everything else back that I'd like to be working on for the show and everything, just because I'm still trying to finish this episode up. So those of you watching the video on YouTube may notice that I did a little bit of editing, like putting up images on screen and stuff like that towards the beginning of the episode, and then it just stops not too far into the episode. I apologize for that. I still do want to do that kind of stuff in the future. Probably just with some shorter video stuff though. Probably not something that's super long like this. I already do have some ideas in mind for some shorter videos and stuff like that to make. So I'm sure I'll really, dive deep into the editing and doing that stuff. It should just continue to get better and better the more I gain experience in editing videos. Because, I just started doing it 100% self-taught. I just have access to Adobe Premiere and I'm completely just doing stuff on the fly. It seems like every time I sit down to edit and I've been doing something a certain way like this entire time, I actually find a new way to do something and make it much faster. But so the main reason I wanted to record this intro section was to point out that the main overall topic that this episode is about, which is the firing of Minnesota Timberwolves president of basketball operations, Gersson Rosas, and how I felt it could be related to the Ben Simmons situation, is not looking very probable at this point. Since I recorded this episode, a statement from the Wolves organization came out, revealing that there was an intense feud between Rosas and, I'm sorry, I'm probably going to pronounce this guy's name wrong. I've never actually heard it said out loud before, so here it goes. Sachin Gupta, who is Minnesota's executive vice president of basketball operations, and he's the one who actually got promoted to replace Gersson Rosas after he was fired. But apparently it was a rather toxic work environment in the Wolves front office, and it even went as far as Rosas banning Gupta from team facilities and the place in which he was employed. And on top of this, Gersson Rosas, who is married, apparently was having intimate relations with somebody within the Wolves organization. And this was also something that I guess the whole front office in Minnesota knew about. And it was something that members of the staff understandably described as uncomfortable. So it's probably not about the Ben Simmons situation. I'm guessing it's probably more about those things. But so I do mention later on in the episode that it's possible that the reason that Rosas got fired could be something crazy like this, that would warrant the unusual timing of the move. But in trying to connect it to his work as a GM and making player transactions and, basketball related moves, I theorize it could have something to do with Ben Simmons. Maybe ownership and other members of the front office being on a different page than Rosas was in acquiring Ben Simmons in a trade. But, with that, I still don't think that the content or the topic of this episode was completely ruined. It is just me examining and theorizing, the ins and outs of what a Ben Simmons to the Wolves trade would look like and how Karl-Anthony Towns could fit on the Sixers, hypothetically, which is just something that I feel like the show's supposed to be about, just fun hypothetical situations and really analyzing stuff like that. So all that stuff still holds up, but I just thought making that update about this topic at the top of this episode was a pretty good idea and somewhat necessary, I'd say. But yeah, that should be it. I'll let you guys get into the actual episode now. And let's roll that intro again, just for fun. Hello, and welcome to Hoop Theory. This is episode 1. Tracy McGrady, Chauncey Billups, Oscar Robertson, Amari Stoudemire, Chris Bosh, Michael Porter Jr. Sorry if I'm missing any notable number ones. I kind of just had to throw MPJ in there at the end because I'm a Nuggets homer. I just thought it'd be fun for this new show to say like an NBA legend that goes along with the episode number. Also, I wasn't really prepared for number one, so that was just right off the top of my head. So I'm probably missing somebody. I just don't know. I think Oscar Robertson is probably the GOAT of number one, I'd say. But yeah, the wait is over. It's finally here. Hoop Theory. At least I'm pretty positive that's what I'm calling it. I'm recording the first episode right now, so I better be sure. I'm not sure if I like Hoop Theory or Hoops Theory better. You know, I came up with the idea just a few months ago to call it Hoop Theory. And then like a month later or a couple months later, you know, when I recorded that final Next Man Up episode, I think I referred to it as Hoops Theory. And I kept saying Hoops Theory because I thought that's what I called it. But then I went and looked at the logo I mocked up for it a while ago and it said Hoop Theory. So who knows at this point, but it's finally here. This is episode 1. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, I've been doing the Next Man Up podcast for a little over a year. I guess I've tried to reel myself back a little bit to kind of enter this thing again from a different angle and not focus very much on the news cycle of it and do more of just the content that I want to make, I guess. It's not necessarily like news cycle based or time reliant. That's why I'm calling it Hoops Theory or Hoop Theory. I already got messed up again just because it'll be more theoretical type stuff like team building, historical type things, legacy, player molds, you know, the roles that different guys play, kind of like the prototype of different play styles, you know, looking into like different players' developments that stand out to me. Basically, whatever I guess I'm gravitated to in whatever that is. And so, you know, it's kind of ironic how this very first episode, you know, of this new show, that the whole idea of it, I guess my whole idea of it, starting it and rebranding, is to not be about, you know, the news of the NBA and shift over to what I was just talking about. But for this very first episode, we're talking about the Ben Simmons drama stuff, which there's been a lot of news about lately. And so it's kind of a news thing, I guess. So we're already off to a great start on that. No, but really, I think that this has a lot more to do with team building and roster construction and trades and things like that than really just news in general. And, you know, I'm not against doing anything with the news. It's just, I don't want to stress and try to squeeze content out just to do the news and to do it in timely manner to match the news rather than what actually works for me. So I'm available right now. Kind of. And the Ben Simmons stuff is really fresh, so it works out. Anyways, before we get into all of that stuff though, make sure to like, subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. I didn't even mention yet that I might be talking a little bit differently than people who listen on Spotify are usually used to. And that's because I'm talking with a camera on me now. I have a video going up on YouTube. I'm planning on doing that for most of these episodes. Just going to be basically me most of the time recording, talking, uploading the video to YouTube and uploading the audio to Spotify. But, you know, there's less than a month now until the NBA season starts, which is pretty nuts. And so before then, there are some episodes that I do want to record with the other guys. If any of you listening do not know or are not aware, that's probably because you haven't listened to much of the Next Man Up podcast in the past. I typically have a lot of guest appearances with Anthony Levtsenyuk and Jacob Roth of The Jacob Roth Show, which he's been uploading episodes recently on Spotify and YouTube, I saw. So go check that out at The Jacob Roth Show. But I'm wanting to get with them to record episodes soon. Anthony's out of state right now, and I've been meaning to hit up Jacob. I already hit up Anthony. Him and I are probably going to do the NBA preseason power rankings in a tier list format. If you guys remember last year, Jacob and I did a way too early power rankings. That was like right after the bubble season in Orlando, right after that season ended, before anything with free agency or the draft or anything started. And we did that same type of format, the tier list. And a lot of things changed, obviously. It wasn't super accurate just because it was way too early. So I wanted to do an episode with Anthony to do the power rankings just because I did it with Jacob last year. And then I had a video with Jacob that I want to do really soon. And I keep forgetting about it, so I'm going to text him about it right now. I'll just text him right now. But I want to do a making sense of the 2021 Atlanta Hawks video. And the reason I wanted Jacob on that episode is because last year's power rankings, the way too early power rankings I was talking about before, in the tier lists, I believe we had championship or bust was the top tier. And I think I had Lakers and Clippers there, and he had just the Lakers. This isn't important, but the different tier names were championship or bust, legit contenders, and then dark horse contenders. I believe it was playoff race below dark horse. Then it was competitive, but not enough. And then it was potential tankers. Anyways, in the dark horse tier, the dark horse contenders, Jacob Roth of the Jacob Roth Show put the Atlanta Hawks. This was right after the bubble ended in 2020. And even if we did that tier list like a month before the playoffs started, like of this year, the 2021 playoffs started, I still would have thought he was crazy. Less crazy, but still crazy. At the beginning of the season, they came out to a little bit better of a start than I was expecting, but it still wasn't good. And I believe, for a lot of the season, they were in that 8-9 range. I'm kind of getting into too much of what, the episode that I'm going to record with Jacob is about. So I'm not going to explain that at all. Just know that we're going to talk about it. Atlanta Hawks were not expected to do well in terms of like being a playoff team and like winning a playoff series. And they went to the conference finals and won like a game or two in the conference finals. 2, yeah, for sure. They won 2. It was a 6-game series. I think they won. Yeah, they won game 1 against the Bucks. Anyways, but the only person I guess that was expecting that I knew was Jacob. And he's not even like a huge basketball guy, but he was really passionate about that take even at the time when he made it. So it'll be fun to look back at that and talk about how this happened, like why Atlanta performed the way that they did. And I'm planning on doing episodes about a lot of teams from last year. Do like a similar type of thing. Like I'll have Jacob out again for the Celtics when we do theirs, because that's his favorite team. We all live in Nebraska, but he's a Boston guy, sports fan, just because we don't have anything around here other than like OKC and Denver and Chicago, Minnesota, all are somewhat kind of close, but not really. And Anthony is a Philly fan because he actually lived in Philadelphia for a little bit. I'm a Nuggets fan, and that's just because they're one of the closest teams, and I've liked them since I was a little kid because of Melo and AI and eventually Chauncey Billups too. But anyways, so I'm going to do a video with Jacob for Hawks and Celtics, like I said, eventually. And when I do a video about the Sixers from last year, that will definitely be a video, and I'll do that with Anthony. Probably do the Nuggets one by myself. I might do the Bucks one by myself. That will be one of the first ones, obviously, because, reigning champs, so they deserve it. Lakers will be another, top one that will be done. I'm going to kind of go, I'm not going to go through every team, but the Suns, just a lot of the more important ones from last year. Probably the Jazz as well. Oh, and Nets, obviously. But anyways, that's what we hopefully got coming down the pike here at Hoop Theory. That sounded kind of weird, but let's get into this stuff that we're going to talk about. Ben Simmons and trade things with him. I need to stop looking down. I keep looking down. You look at the camera. I'm going to adjust this a little bit. I think I like that. So Ben Simmons. So this is something I was texting about with the aforementioned Jacob Roth and Anthony Levsonuk. And I kind of hate when we do that, honestly. I mean, I love talking sports with those guys or anything, obviously. But sometimes I feel like we get out like our best content of like things we're talking about over text or on our on Instagram DMs and stuff like that, instead of like while we do an episode, doing an episode about it. But we're not available to record at all times. So yeah, I just thought this is a good topic to kind of touch on. And I just figured I would at least mention that we already kind of talked about this over text and stuff, just so I'm going to be kind of regurgitating the same takes that I typed out yesterday. So I don't think it's really stealing if it's from yourself. Yeah. And I also saw over on Jacob Roth show on his latest episode on Spotify that he actually talked about this. He did the Ben Simmons topic. And I was planning on doing this already. Now it's kind of weird that we're both talking about the same exact thing, kind of the same exact scenario and discussion too, but on different shows, not doing it together. But anyways, so for anybody who doesn't know, I know that I do have some friends and people that listen to the podcast and maybe watch this video that don't know a ton about NBA and basketball. So I'll explain this a little bit in depth. So Ben Simmons, first pick in the 2016 draft. He's been a player that, there's been this whole narrative around him and the 76ers that him and the other star player in Philly, Joel Embiid, do not fit together. Joel Embiid has struggled with injuries his whole career. So for a while there was a toss-up. There was kind of a debate between, which one does Philly want to keep and stuff like that. And also Ben Simmons, I feel like a lot of his value has been kind of projected value. People think what he's going to grow into in the future, what he's going to develop into. And that, I think his development has actually, it's definitely disappointed, most of the people that were on Team Ben at the time, but even people who were speculative or even people that were on Team Embiid, even they are probably surprised by the lack of, development that we've seen from Ben Simmons, specifically on the offensive end so far in his career. I'm going back up. Yeah, I like this better, actually. Sorry, I raised you guys up a little bit. I kind of like this angle better. The whole thing is Embiid is probably the most dominant paint presence in the NBA. That's where he gets his work done on the offensive end. Ben Simmons is not a shooter, never has been, and he doesn't even attempt three-point shots. So he's just about the worst floor spacer in the NBA in terms of, three-point spacing, stretching out the defense on the perimeter. So generally, that just makes it a lot harder for your offense to run at the rim if it's not that literal person that's the bad spacer who's scoring at the rim. So them together, especially in late game situations, and those are like your 1 and 2, those are your best guys, and they just kind of get in each other's ways, because what Ben Simmons brings to the offensive end of the court is primarily, and it has been his whole career, the stuff that he can do with the ball in his hands. But if the ball's in his hands, the ball's not in Embiid's hands. And Embiid has proven to be the much more effective and efficient player to go to as your option, your number one option to score and everything like that. Ben is really more of a facilitator, and Embiid's not going to just play second fiddle to a facilitator that doesn't create any space. A roll man for a guy like him isn't going to get a whole lot of, residual value in plays because of how frequently the defender is going to go under screens because he doesn't have a threat to shoot at all. So Embiid really doesn't get any sort of advantage out of a two-man game. And they're both just camped down at the block all game long, essentially. It would be better if Simmons was, did more things off ball. Like, if he was a more intuitive cutter, had more feel for the game in that sort of way. If he would crash the boards and crash the weak side to get nice dump off passes, like in cutting situations with Embiid, that would be better. It would also be better, not all that is to blame on Ben. That's one of Embiid's weaknesses. Even though he's a dominant paint force, he's not like a Jokic or even like, a Vucevic or something like that, to where he can consistently make those kinds of reads and those kinds of passes out of the low post. So basically, to sum it all up, they suck together. That's not exactly fair. And I actually, that's the kind of take that makes that whole side, that whole region of people that were a thing for so long, that makes me cringe thinking back to it. Those people have been quiet for a while now, I bet. The people that always used to say after every season, when everybody was saying, get Simmons out of there, get Embiid out of there, they need to split them up in some way. All those people that are like, Simmons and Embiid are fine. They work fine. Like there's no they say like, there's no problem with Simmons and Embiid together. Look at, they've had 51 seasons the last couple of years. They can work just fine together. It's like, okay, they won 50 games. That means they're like a 4 seed, usually something like that. And they haven't made it out of the second round, those guys. And they a lot of times haven't made it out of the first round with those guys. So, nobody's arguing that they haven't been a pretty good team, but they would be a lot better. Those players themselves would be a lot better if they weren't on each other's team. That's the entire point. And the people who argue they're a pretty good team when they're together, that's what they're missing about that argument. They're missing the point. It's not optimal. It's not ideal. It's far from it. And last season, people kind of started to talk about that less. The Sixers went off, to a really good start in the season, but they were number 1 seed in the East all season long. And a big part of that was, Ben Simmons was playing well. He made another All-Star team, and just like the last couple of seasons now, where he's had a really good stretch during the season, like before the All-Star game, and kind of squeaks in there, gets an All-Star appearance, and then after the All-Star game, it seems like almost immediately he has like the worst stretch of the season. He goes through a really bad slump. It was really bad this year, and it never really got back up there, even when the playoffs started. But earlier this season, he went off and scored 42 against the Jazz. But the main thing, Ben Simmons was in Defensive Player of the Year contention. I believe he did finish second. A lot of people actually did think he should have finished first. He turned himself into the best wing defender in the NBA this past year. So that was a huge leap from where he was as a prospect coming out of college. That was not something that was on the scouting report. He was compared much more to like a LeBron type of offensive player. Defense seemed to not give much of an effort ever, but he's really turned around on that end of the floor and really developed super well, which is something that I feel like he doesn't get enough credit for when people talk about his development. Usually I think it's just because they're talking about offense, but they don't really make that specification. He's developed a lot on the defensive end of the floor, a lot more than almost every other player has. So that's really big. That shouldn't go unmentioned, I guess. But in the playoffs this past year, Simmons on offense was scared to shoot in a lot of scenarios because I think he had one of the worst, if not the worst, playoff performance in terms of free throw percentage. And the Hawks, actually, their game plan at the end of a lot of those games was to literally just send Ben to the line. I believe the Wizards were even doing it the round before. They would just foul Ben at the end of games. And hope that he would just keep missing free throws. And it was happening. He was making like 30-something% for a while. I believe it squeaked on up to like 40, mid 40s, which is still really bad. I might even be wrong on that. It might have not even eclipsed 40, but it got so bad that he was not being aggressive at all, taking to the rim. So at that point, what is he even out there for? His main skills as a player on offense, he is an elite level playmaker. And a huge part of that is how he puts pressure on the rim, especially in the open court. So in transition, when he has a full head of steam, that's when he's at his best. But in the half court scenario, his value comes from putting pressure on the rim. And usually that's with the ball in his hands. And especially, that's just the way that especially Doc Rivers has used him, and Brett Brown did in the past as well. He experimented last year a little bit with using him a little bit more as a roll man, which I thought it should have been done like this whole time. And Doc Rivers, I feel like, does have partly to blame with that. I don't think he's utilized Ben the best ways so far in his Philadelphia career, which is just 1 year. But I mean, Doc Rivers, his Philadelphia career. But still, anyways, Ben Simmons on offense, like other than being a decent screen setter and cutter, which is still the same thing. It's still like the reason why he's a threat at those things is the pressure that he puts on the rim. He's not going to score from anywhere else. And he's an athletic, 6'10" dude. So he puts pressure on the rim. It's kind of a nuanced basketball take, but that's just as valuable as 3-point spacing. Really, it depends on how your team is structured, but the way that Philly's roster is structured, in most lineups, that is a super valuable thing. The pressure that Simmons puts on the rim, having 4 out, around him. Embiid can stretch the floor. Obviously, Tobias Harris. Seth Curry is a lights out shooter, as we know. Danny Green's a good spot up shooter. Whoever else they had out there, Thibault was actually even improving a little bit in that department this year. So like even in Philadelphia's horrible shooting system, in the years past, this is the better 3-point shooting team probably that they've had the past 3 or 4 years, ever since JJ Redick left, and maybe even the last year with JJ Redick, this team is even better than that. But even though they've been a poor space team, very clunky offense the past several years, in that 3 or 4 year stretch, nobody in the NBA created more 3-point opportunities for his teammates than Ben Simmons. And that's just because of how centralized and focused his skill set is. It's not because he is the best at putting pressure on the rim in the NBA. I believe, Giannis and maybe even like Anthony Davis, a couple other guys would probably be, above him, or at least right there with him. Giannis definitely above him, but the difference is Ben Simmons, that's his only thing. That's all he does offensively, is puts pressure on the rim. And he's a great passer. He's a better passer than Giannis is. So that's a huge part in getting, the ball to the open man. A lot of times swinging it across to, kind of flank the rotation of the defense. That'll be a much longer pass to make. And the more skillful passer will definitely have the advantage there, obviously. So the way Ben Simmons creates value is he attacks the rim and causes the defense to collapse and kicks it out to shooters. That's like the whole blueprint. So if he stops attacking the rim, if he stops driving at the rim, and even if he does a little bit, a lot of times he would just pass out of those drives, or he would give up wide open opportunities. There's that one famous clip of him right next to the rim with I think he got an offensive rebound, but he was right there for a dunk. And it was Trae Young, 6'0" Trae Young was rotating over under the basket to him. It was not a threat to him at all. Trae Young might have tried to foul him hard, but Ben Simmons is 6'10" and has at least 50 something pounds, probably more than that, on Trae Young. So I'm sure he would have a pretty good chance of finishing through that contact. But that's just how much of a mind game it was for Ben Simmons. He just passed out of it. He didn't even want to deal with the chance of him going to the line late in the game. And so he passed it up to Thibault, who's, he's a better free throw shooter than Simmons is, but he's still not a good one. And, he didn't have as near as good of a look as Simmons did. And he got fouled and sent to the line and missed the first one. He missed one of them. It doesn't really matter which. But that was a big pivotal moment in the game, as Embiid stated in the post-game interview, where he kind of threw Ben under the bus there a little bit. That's where this whole thing kind of started. Ben Simmons' horrible performance in the playoffs, just complete, total collapse. Became an absolute zero. I think in the whole playoffs, in the fourth quarter, he had a total of 4 points the entire playoffs, something like that. I don't know if I'm exaggerating that, but it's something like that. You should look it up. He played really poorly, and he gave up the part of his game on offense, the only thing that made him valuable, which was his threat to score at the basket. And he also didn't want the ball in his hands because he didn't want to be fouled. And that's what the other team wanted to do, was keep fouling him, because he just kept missing them. You would think after a while he would develop a little bit of a rhythm, but I mean, he's not typically that bad at free throws. In the regular season, he has a much higher percentage. It's still not good, but it's at least to the point where it's a somewhat efficient offense that you don't want to, it's not like an advantage for the defense to just send him to the line every single possession, because he, makes in the regular season in his career, like I believe like 6 out of 10, somewhere in that range. And that's a W for the offense most times. But taking a 20 to 30% dip in efficiency from the line is that's huge. And that's what was going on. So, and after they got eliminated from the playoffs, I think that was in the elimination game that passed up dunk happened. And so Embiid kind of threw him under the bus. The post-game interview, Doc Rivers was asked in the post-game interview, do you believe that Ben Simmons can be, I think he said point guard on a championship team, which that's a whole other subject. I'll just go off on it right now because this is my show. I just don't like it when people call Ben Simmons a point guard. I'm sorry, I don't. I shouldn't say it like that. I'm fine with people calling him a point guard in the sense of like, I don't know, when you're doing more of a deep dive, like kind of talking about his offensive game. But I just hate it when people like go out of their way to, like, Ben Simmons gets called a point guard more than like Mike Conley gets called a point. Like, you never hear people go like, Utah Jazz point guard Mike Conley. It's just kind of like Mike Conley of the Utah Jazz. I don't know. I feel like whenever people mention Ben Simmons, they're always like Philadelphia point guard. It's like, okay, it just bothers me. Is LeBron a point guard? I know that a lot of people would say that too. And that kind of bothers me too. Do we really have that little creativity that every player that we see that can have the ball and initiate offense, that's a point guard? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. Describing somebody's game, play style, I don't think it really defines their position in basketball. In other sports, it does. And I'm fine with using it as like a stereotype thing. Like, I would never say that Bruce Brown for the Nets, I would never call him a center. Or I would never call him Brooklyn Nets big Bruce Brown. But if you watch the Nets offense, Bruce Brown plays like a big man would in your traditional stereotypical offense. He's the roll man. He's an off-ball cutter. He scores at the rim all the time, and he's a 6'3"-ish guard. I still call him a guard. I'm pretty sure most like rosters and stuff still list him as a guard. That's just because he's not as famous of a person, honestly. And somebody had the crazy idea of like, oh, this guy's 6'10" and has like guard skills, so we're gonna start calling him a point guard just because that will get people's attention. I honestly think that's what it was about. Like, people who don't watch a ton of NBA basketball or whatever, they would tune in and be like, whoa, this number 1 pick from the draft and plays for Philadelphia, he's a 6'10" point guard. Honestly, if I was alive back in the 80s, I'm not sure if I would have been too fond of like people calling Magic Johnson a point guard. I still list him as a point guard all the time just because that's what everybody lists him as. But I don't know. I'm much more about like defense when I think about positions, and more specifically like player dimensions, like their size and mobilities, like their measurables. That's like the position that they are. And the reason why I say this is because like even when a couple of years ago, like they started listing LeBron James as point guard on the Lakers, I guess just for the fun of it. Sorry, there's a train. And that was like a really big thing too. They were really trying to push that down everybody's throat, was that he's a point guard. They kept reiterating it. It would be all over stuff like for the All-Star game and stuff like that. They were like, and for all NBA teams, like, oh, he has to be listed as a guard. I'm not sure if they actually do that. There's a lot of talk around that anyways. But it's like, okay, so if he's a point guard, when you look at their lineups, why do they have KCP and Alex Caruso out there too? And like every lineup has like at least one, sometimes even two guys that was like a 6'2" to 6'4", 5, somewhere in there, guard that was guarding the backcourt players and playing guard. Like they were playing those positions. They were playing point guard and shooting guard. LeBron was essentially the small forward or power forward usually in terms of matchups. Like, who do you match up with on the other team? And in general, what position on the other side of the court are you going to be matched up with most of the time? That's your position. That's what I would say. I think that's the best way to define it at this point, because everybody, that's such like a big topic of everybody like always talking about, oh, the game is becoming so positionless, like positions don't mean anything anymore. But then they continue to like just throw around all the position terms willy-nilly. Again, I'm fine with using them in the context of describing players, but not in terms of like categorizing them, of what like listing them on the roster as a thing. Like, I would not call Ben Simmons a guard. I would not call Ben Simmons a backcourt player. I would not call him I would not list him as a guard on the all NBA teams. I would not do that. Does he guard sometimes on defense? Yeah, because he's a super versatile defender. He's a Swiss Army knife defender. But he's 6'10", and he lines up on the other end of the court most times with big wings. He's a big wing defender. His position is he's a big wing. That's what I would call him. So he's a forward, typically the power forward, although with Tobias Harris, probably the small forward most of the time. Another thing, my team, the Nuggets, they always list even though Aaron Gordon guards the threes most of the time, he guards the small forwards, and MPJ guards the power forwards, they still list MPJ as the 3 and Aaron Gordon as the 4, just because they look at it offensively. It's just, to me, offensively, positions really don't mean anything anymore. Any player of any size can have really any skill set for the most part. So why try to define the position based off their offensive skill set? It's just like a very slippery slope to me. But anyways, back to the LeBron James thing. It's just very funny when they were like, he's a point guard. He is the Lakers point guard. They do need to have somebody out there, KCP, to guard the opposing team's point guards. And then also there was a big narrative for a while because like LeBron James was getting tired and, wore out because, he's getting up there in years, obviously. What the Lakers need is another guy to initiate, to bring the ball up the court for the Lakers on offense. That's not LeBron. So LeBron can save his energy for the half court sets or whatever. It's like, so how is he a point guard now? You began with calling him a point guard just because he was bringing the ball up the court and initiating everything. So he doesn't defend point guards, and now he doesn't even bring the ball up the court and isn't like the initial initiator. He's still the primary initiator because obviously he's going to initiate most of the sets. Everything's going to go through him. Like he's going to get touches more than anybody, obviously, but that doesn't mean he's a point guard. Jokic gets the most touches on the Nuggets. Like every set runs through him. Is he a point guard? No. You could describe him as like a point center. I'm fine with that. That's not a position. He's a center. He guards centers. He's 7 foot. And like 260 something pounds. He's a center. LeBron James, 6'9", 250 something. He's a forward at least. But anyways, I've gone on this rant kind of before. It's going to be something I continue to do because there's not a whole lot of people that agree with me on this. I don't think, at least. I haven't heard this as a take from other people. This is just kind of one of my takes that I keep coming back to. Ever since we started calling like these huge people point guards, it never really sat right with me, I guess. Just because I was like, that's really that's a very limited way to think about like a position because you're making it undefinable now. If you're doing that, just because you're like, oh, this guy can pass and he has the ball a lot, he must be the point guard. Offenses have been running through players of different positions for quite a while now. Obviously, it's happening more and more. It's becoming like much less dependent on position than it ever has. But that doesn't mean there's not positions. There's still size matchups. Like teams are still rolling out lineups with the backcourt size players, the 6'3" guys up to the 7-footers, and teams match up with each other. And that's just how it works. So those are positions. Anyways, Ben Simmons, the Philadelphia 76ers forward, point forward, if you will. I can't remember why I got on the position rant. Oh yeah, Doc Rivers. Doc Rivers in the postgame interview was asked, do you believe that Ben Simmons can be the point guard on a championship team? And Doc Rivers responded with something like, I don't know the answer to that question right now. This was, again, right after they got eliminated from the playoffs. So he was pretty, upset and emotional. But anyways, those two things, Embiid throwing him under the bus in his interview and Doc Rivers saying not so supportive things about him in his postgame interview, that really, I think, made Ben Simmons decide he really didn't want to return to Philly. Also, probably seeing all those videos of fans burning and like stomping on his jerseys right outside of the arena. There were people like threatening his life and stuff like that. People in Philly were not happy then, and that has continued until now. Everybody still wants him out of Philly. Even Anthony, our friend, that's usually a more reasonable fan as far as Sixers fans go. So that's a very low bar to reach, but he's usually, a more reasonable one out of those ones. And he lives in Nebraska, so a little bit less engulfed in the Philly culture, I guess. Even he does not want to see Ben Simmons back on the court for the Sixers. He really wants him out. So for just about anything at this point. But the thing about that is they have a really smart GM there in Philadelphia, president of basketball operations, whatever it is. I believe Elton Brand is technically the GM and Daryl Morey is the president of basketball ops. But anyways, Daryl Morey, super smart guy. He's made lots of really good deals in the past. He's one of the pioneers in the analytics community of basketball over the past couple decades. And he's all about really unconventional type of trades and deals, not just giving up assets because the narrative or it's an unhappy situation and things like that. He really does a good job of not losing sight of the actual value of different assets and making sure that he gets even more value back. Getting equal value in a trade back, I feel like for him in his eyes is settling. So this summer he's been patiently, asking all around, not panicking about, oh, Ben Simmons is saying he doesn't want to come to training camp and he's never going to play for the Sixers again. That's stuff that's been coming out the last few days. He's been waiting patiently, I think, just prodding around, trying to find the best offer that he can get out of everybody. I think he's just asking for the top shelf type of deals so far, like Dame, like Bradley Beal, maybe Levine, but I don't even know. Like, honestly, in my eyes, the Bulls trading Levine over for Simmons straight up is a loss for the Bulls, in my opinion. But I would go as far as to say Daryl would even see that as a loss. Not necessarily as a loss, but not the best thing that he can get. Lower than what he can get out of Ben Simmons. So I don't know if Daryl Morey has reached that point yet either, if he would be willing to do a deal like that. But then you see other markets like Sacramento, who was a team for a while that's been, in the Ben Simmons kind of sweepstakes, if that's what we want to call it. They came out and said that De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Halliburton were both off the table for a Ben Simmons deal. They were both untouchable. They weren't going to give either of those guys up in a Ben Simmons trade, which I like. Again, Daryl Morey, if he was offered Fox for Simmons straight up, I doubt he would say yes right now, at least. And, I would say Fox is maybe a little bit below Levine in terms of asset value, I would say. I feel like that's an agreeable thing to say. Most people would probably agree with that. I guess I'm kind of losing sight on my gauge of how good Zach LaVine is, because I feel like he's very polarizing. There's a lot of people that really like him, and there's a lot of people that really don't care much about him. Fox is kind of similar, but in a more quiet way, I guess. Anyways, Tyrese Halliburton being off limits for Ben Simmons, again, is interesting. Does not sound like Sacramento is too keen on adding Simmons, which is odd because they just last season were one of the worst defenses in NBA history. And Simmons would be a very, very useful tool for that team. But who knows? And they're, young rebuilding team or, in the process of building at least, that could afford to take a swing on Simmons' upside. So I don't know. They're not locked into really, like, Fox is there, but now I guess they're locked in on Halliburton and Fox. So I don't know. I was about to say they're not locked in on like a franchise cornerstone right now. Depends on what you think of Fox. I tend to really like Fox, but is his ceiling, number one player on a really, really good team? I don't know. So I would think, though, a team that would want to bring Simmons in would be a team that would be willing to kind of build around him for the most part. And Fox and Simmons aren't like a horrible combination, I would say. It's not great and it's not ideal by any means. They definitely do not elevate each other's play, but Fox is improving as an outside shooter. It's still one of his main weaknesses. We have no idea what Ben Simmons will look like next year. I'm sure that most people probably would say that, they're positive he's going to look exactly the same, if not worse, but I don't know. Like, this is different. This is a different kind of offseason than he's ever had. I know that he's had offseasons in the past where everybody's saying he needs to work on shooting. This is different. This is a different one. I don't know how he's going to respond. I could see it going either way. Honestly, he could improve. He could mold his game a little bit, change it a little bit. Who knows? If he's thinking much at all about building a sustaining high level career in the NBA moving forward, he should probably start thinking about, developing some other tools offensively, not necessarily shooting threes a lot, but shooting them when he's given completely wide open opportunities, especially in like the first half of regular season games and stuff like that. Maybe start taking those. But if he even develops just a little bit of like an interior mid-range, turnaround fadeaway post game, high post type stuff to score more efficiently and just make more free throws, get above the 60% mark and stay there even in the playoffs, even that would be a really good player. He'd be a really good player. He just would be. And in a different system that's more, spaced out, where there's not like a huge interior presence on the court with him, he might even be a lot more free to put even more pressure on the rim, create even more outside shots for the teammates around him, and be a little bit more in type of like Giannis role. Yeah, to wrap this up though, so I think it was yesterday, if not 2 days ago now, I believe it was yesterday, Gerson Rosas of the Minnesota Timberwolves, he got fired. He was the president of basketball operations, for anybody who doesn't know, which was a shock because for a little while now, he's been kind of regarded as one of the better GMs in the league. And he also comes from a very reputable executive tree, whatever you want to call it. He used to work under Daryl Morey, ironically. And again, like right before training camp is about to start, Wolves kicked him out and promoted somebody from within, I believe. I think it must have been, assistant GM or something like that. But the funny thing is Karl Anthony Towns, the star player on Minnesota Timberwolves, he has been for the past half decade, other than when Jimmy was there, I guess. But he didn't know about it, apparently. they did not consult their star player before firing their president of basketball operations right before training camp. And we know that because Karl-Anthony Towns, KAT for short, tweeted out something like, "What the heck is going on?" or something like that shortly after that news dropped. So that doesn't sound very good for Timberwolves fans who want to keep KAT, which I assume are all Timberwolves fans. I don't really know. I guess I don't have the gauge on Wolves fans. I don't really know any, but KAT is a very skillful player entering his prime, and your team is really bad. So I'd assume you would want him, unless you are, one of those fans that are, super into, the long game of tanking and everything, like some OKC fans have been forced into lately. But initially, I was really confused because it doesn't make any sense. I believe Chris Vernon tweeted this out, but this is also my initial reaction of, something must have happened. Something must be going on beyond the statement they gave out, which was something along the lines of he was fired because of recent team success, like the lack thereof over the past several seasons. Okay, so why let him make all these moves that he made in the offseason? They made quite a few trades. They made some moves, and then you're going to fire him right before you start training camp? I don't really see how that makes sense. And then also, I was thinking in regards with the Simmons trade, because the Wolves have been like one of the top teams in the Simmons, realm of trade talks for a while now. And all of those trades were based around like, D'Angelo Russell, Malik Beasley, some probably with Anthony Edwards as like a piece being thrown in there to make it interesting, and picks and stuff like that. Not like a whole lot of really things that you can do with Wolves trade package that would make a whole lot of sense for the Sixers. At least, D'Lo and Beasley can shoot, which is good, but who knows if those are really the type of guys that is going to, put the Sixers over the hump. The Sixers want to win now. They want to make this Simmons move into something that they can get back to help them win. They don't want, draft capital and stuff like that, unless you have something lined up, where they can flip that immediately for a win now type of piece. And I always thought that the Wolves were one of the main candidates for making the Simmons trade because of Gerson Rosas and Daryl Morey's relationship. Those guys are buddies. They might work out a deal together. But unless there's just something completely different about, like, it's not related to the Simmons trade talk at all, and there's something really internal, like, something bad happened, or, something really went down between Gerson Rosas and other people there in the Wolves front office, or something along those lines. It's also new ownership, so who knows? But it's really poor timing because new ownership took over it's been a while now. So they could have made this move before the offseason started. And their offseason started way before the actual offseason started because they missed the playoffs and everything, obviously. So it's very weird timing. So that makes me think it's got to be something, we don't know about that's warranting firing a president of basketball operations that doesn't have anything to do with actual basketball moves, or it's something that has to do with actual basketball moves. And if you were thinking about that, what that would be, it's got to be with the Simmons trade. What else would be going on? Are the Wolves aren't candidates for like going out and getting Bradley Beal? I don't think, at least. That would be pretty wild. Or Dame. Dame would not. Okay, neither Bradley Beal or Dame would want to go to Minnesota. I do not foresee that happening. Both those guys have too much leverage of, those are guys that have earned, the leverage that they have in terms of where they get moved and the loyalty to their team and to their fan base and everything. Ben Simmons doesn't really have that. And he has 4 years left on his deal. So he has not much leverage in terms of where he goes, but he is represented by Clutch, who is pretty much the agent pioneer of doing these, exploding the whole thing and leaving a situation in the worst way possible with a couple of his players or his clients now, namely Anthony Davis back in 2018, or whatever that was, with the Pelicans. I don't believe Clutch represents James Harden, but James Harden, I think he set a whole new precedent. And that's the thing that we're seeing Simmons do now. He's kind of doing the James Harden thing of, I'm not coming to training camp, which actually was a little bit different. This is worse for multiple reasons. That's true. It's worse for multiple reasons. James Harden, number one, I don't think he ever said he's not going to training camp. He just wasn't answering any calls or anything. He didn't show up, and he wasn't talking to the new head coach that they hired, Steven Silas, and he wasn't answering phone calls, and he was out partying and stuff like that, going to clubs during COVID and everything, which was against, all the NBA mandates and stuff. And then when he finally did show up to training camp, which was a few days late, he was really out of shape, probably the worst shape he's been in his career. And he played most of the games at the beginning of the season. I believe he played 8 or 7 out of the 8 or 8 out of 9, something like that, games that they had while he was there in Houston at the beginning of the season, and he really mailed them in, was not giving forth any sort of an effort, which was obvious. But like, so all this was horrible, and I was really not happy about it at the time because of the precedent it was setting, and the precedent that actually Adam Silver and the league were setting by not cracking down on it in any way and not allowing the Rockets to stop paying him, or not pay him for his job that he's not doing. So I was a little scared of that, because if that's happening, it's just going to keep getting worse probably. And while we have this commissioner and Adam Silver, and the reason why Ben Simmons' situation is even worse is because, number one, he is actually saying in reports and like to the 76ers front office that he's not going to come to training camp and he's not ever going to play for the 76ers again. Like, he's straight out saying that he's not going to do it and that he wants to be traded, and he has a specific list of where he wants to get traded. I believe he has Golden State and the 2 LA teams on there. So he's demanding a lot for, he doesn't have much leverage. He has 4 years left on his deal. His value, the value of him as an asset, is totally tanked, and he's making it worse by what he's doing. But also the advantage, I guess, the thing that makes it not as terrible on Ben Simmons' side versus the James Harden thing, the advantage that he does have in this scenario or in this comparison is that Ben Simmons is outright like hated in Philadelphia. Philadelphia wants nothing to do with him as far as the fan base goes, especially. It's not like he's a beloved figure there, really, nor has he really ever had been. That didn't sound right. But anyways, even though, like I said before, there was a time where there was a discussion between Simmons and Embiid, like those were two actual camps. The Simmons camp was never quite as big as the Embiid camp was. They got to a point where they were somewhat comparable, but Embiid has always been, he's been the process. That's his name. That's what they call him. He's the Sixers guy. It's just not the same thing. James Harden brought the Rockets to be one of the best teams in the NBA over the course of his 8-year career there. Led the league in scoring a multiple of those seasons. He won an MVP. He came in like the top 3 MVP voting like 4 of those years. A revolutionary player. One of the best Rockets of all time, if not the best. I probably wouldn't put him over Hakeem, obviously, just because the rings thing, mainly. Also, if you just took away rings in general and compared them as like overall players, I still probably would take Hakeem just because of the two-way impact. They both have MVP awards. I think Hakeem's came at a little bit of a tougher time. I would say maybe. No, actually probably not, because his MVP award came when Michael Jordan was not in the league while he was playing baseball. So I guess that took, the competition level quite a bit down. But anyways, again, this doesn't matter. But James Harden was beloved in Houston, and he basically just kind of spat on a city and a fan base that really respected him and wanted him, wanted him to stay, and, didn't really apologize much for it. I think he did apologize to like Steven Silas, the head coach, and teammate. I don't even know if he apologized. I think he just went over after he got traded to the Nets. When they met again for a game, he went over to them and like shake their hand. This Ben Simmons thing that's happening is kind of like that. It's just this player empowerment thing is getting just more and more extreme in the terms of them calling their shots when they don't have any leverage, like at all, or at least don't have any leverage by the way we used to define leverage. But it seems like it doesn't really matter anymore, especially when you have the right agent like Clutch, Rich Paul. Anyways, though, as I was saying, the Wolves, Gerson Rosas getting canned right before training camp starting. I think it could have something to do with the Simmons deal. If it's something that is basketball move related, that seems like the most obvious one. It could be that, leadership there, the new owners, I can't remember his name, I'm sorry. I'm not referring to A-Rod, by the way. I know who A-Rod is, but the majority owner, the guy who really has the big money that bought the team with A-Rod. Somebody there might want a Simmons deal done. And the fact that they didn't consult or talk to Cat about it makes me very skeptical of whether or not Cat might be part of the deal in some sort of way. And this got me thinking about Cat being traded, which is, it's just weird. If I'm a Wolves fan, I don't know how I feel about giving up Cat for Simmons. I think that Philadelphia would have to throw in a little bit to really make that move. I don't know if Daryl would do that outright. He, again, might have to let it wait for a little bit to do that because he doesn't want to settle too much. But this got me thinking, right away, I just thought maybe it's like the Simmons thing. So I texted the guys, Anthony and Jacob. I said, did the Wolves just fire Rosas to promote somebody that will make the Simmons trade? And Jacob said, LOL, I think it's the Sixers side, not the Timberwolves. I get what he means by that, just because I think he thought I meant a deal or a package with just like D'Lo and Malik Beasley, because I'm sure the Wolves probably were willing, like Rosas might have been willing to already give that. It's just Daryl Morey wasn't willing to take that at this time. But what I mean is What if they were getting a president of basketball ops who would make that trade with Cat? Give the piece in there that Daryl Morey would actually go for. This kind of got the conversation going differently. Now we're talking about why would, the 76ers want Cat? And initially in my mind, I wasn't necessarily thinking that the Sixers were going to get Cat straight up. They might involve a third or fourth team, or it could have been a thing that he flips Cat into something else right after the fact. So it didn't necessarily mean that Cat was going to land in Philadelphia, but it would be the Wolves are trading away Cat and getting Simmons in return, whatever that looks like. A 3-team trade could work in that way. But I also wouldn't be super surprised if Daryl Morey actually did just go for Cat and get him on this Sixers roster. Just because it's something that I think would raise a lot of eyebrows. A lot of people in the general public would be like, that's weird. That doesn't make much sense. But I honestly, it's just kind of like a revolutionary or like a kind of outside of the box thinking type of deal to make. Daryl Morey, is prone to making deals like that. He always has been. Also, Daryl Morey loves to trade for stars. If you look back at, moves that he's made over the years, he really prioritizes getting a star in return, not like the quarters on a dollar, several different players that are all good, but none of them are like a number one type of guy. He really wants to get that number one type of guy. He seems to value that even more than most GMs do. And here's the reason why I think it'll work. Well, first I'll kind of go through this thing a little bit. So Jacob said, after I clarified and said, what if the deal involves Cat? He didn't even know that Gerson Rosas was going to get fired, and they did it without consulting him. And Jacob was like, why would the Sixers want Cat? Understandably, that was my very, very initial thought at first too. It took me, a little bit to think about it. And after I did think about it, the more and more I'm liking it, honestly, for the Sixers side of things. But Jacob said, why would the Sixers want Cat? It's the same problem. Morey wants to win the deal, but he also is a competent team builder. And I was like, I don't see how it's the same problem at all. So what he means is 2 centers, he said. So 2 guys that are going to do a lot of their work down low. And I don't blame Jacob for not watching a ton of Wolves. I don't blame him at all. But Karl-Anthony Towns, he might be thought of by a lot of people as like a low post scorer because he plays center and everything. But the Wolves have been like trying to get him to do that more. That's been like kind of the arc of his career so far, is that he has tended to kind of want to spot up and want to like score from the perimeter more than post up and stuff like that. He personally, his play style that he seems to gravitate towards seems like it would be more perimeter centric than, in the post. So, and this is something that I thought of before too, like just, making random teams on 2K. That Cat as a stretch 4 would be an interesting idea if he was on the same team as like an elite post threat or elite post player, and just be like a mega floor spacer at the 4 position that still gives you a lot of size as well. But Jacob said, yeah, they have very different skill sets, but that doesn't make them better. They lose so much on defense to gain barely anything on offense because they are filling a void they have already filled. Which I don't know what that means exactly, but with the defense and offense thing, the trade-off, obviously big step down on defense just on paper from Simmons to Cat. Simmons probably the most mobile 6'9 plus guy in the league right now as far as defending across positions, and Cat is very not mobile. That's like his weakness. I shouldn't say mobile because he can move. He's a nimble guy, but defensively he's not great on the perimeter. If he's brought out, like stretched out on an island, to defend in space, whatever you want to call it, when he gets switched on to wings and guards, that's usually when he gets burned. But for the most part, that's, them getting past him to get to the rim. And he's, brought out pretty far. So there's no rim protection because he is the rim protector on their team. That's the way it always has been in Minnesota. He's been the rim protector his whole career there. With the Sixers, Embiid is a monster rim protector, one of the very best in the league, perhaps even top 2 with the Gobert. And we just don't even see him protect the rim even as much as we see some of the other, high level rim protectors in the league, like Gobert, like Capella, like Miles Turner, like Anthony Davis, those guys. Just because of how tight-knit the Sixers perimeter defense has been, they're very switchable. They fight over screens. They defend well at the point of attack. So there's not a whole lot to defend at the rim, usually. Not near as much as some of those other teams. The way those other teams construct their defenses, especially the Jazz and the Pacers and Hawks, have kind of followed a similar blueprint. Not necessarily maybe intentionally in every case, but all 3 of those teams are built around, their defense at least, is built around an elite rim protector, and everybody else is either average defensively or a liability. Other than in Atlanta's case, DeAndre Hunter, but he was out for a lot of the season last year and out for most of the playoffs last year as well. So I'm not really counting him when I'm talking about the Hawks defensive scheme. Cam Reddish was really the only guy that came in there, defended the same type of way, and it wasn't quite to the same level, but it was an approximation of what DeAndre Hunter does on the defensive end on the perimeter. But the way those teams' defenses are constructed and the way they work is they got a really elite rim protector that basically swallows everything up at the rim. Like, it's a really efficient defense to just say, come challenge this guy at the rim every play. We'll take that bet. Like, we'll outscore you that way, we think. Because that rim protector is going to be efficient enough at defending the paint that you won't score too much, basically. And in the Jazz case, you won't score very much at all. We're going to funnel everything to Gobert because he's one of the best shot blockers in the history of the universe. So he's just going to challenge your shot every time at the rim, and he's going to have a really good efficiency doing that. So that's why Utah is in the top 10, usually top 5 defense in the NBA every single year, even though they don't have any good perimeter defenders other than Royce O'Neal. I'll give him, a shout out there. Just one guy. And really the main thing with that team is not even necessarily the personnel, it's mainly the scheme. And so the scheme there in Utah under Coach Quinn Snyder is defensively, don't prioritize getting blown by. Like, give up attacks at the rim. If you're a perimeter defender, really take away the 3-pointer and outside shots. Really close out, really stay tight on those guys out on the perimeter. Like, space the defense, just like most teams' offenses try to do to defenses most of the time, is you're trying to space out the defense to allow a room to work or whatever. But with teams that have an exception where they have an elite rim protector, that they're fine doing that, like the Jazz, that's how they win games a lot of times on the defensive end, is they stay tight to shooters to make the 3-point shot much less valuable for the other team and force them to take the ball inside. And that's a battle that they're willing to enter because Gobert is a really good rim protector. I think I've said that enough. Same type of blueprint for Capella and the Hawks and Miles Turner and the Pacers. That's why those guys rack up so many blocks per game. But what we've seen from the Jazz in the playoffs the last couple of years now, I think it's really just because of how good Gobert has been in that and how good Utah has been using that system and how also good coaching adjustments and stuff have been in the West in recent years, that this has gotten exploited. Like Gobert, kind of like Simmons, his skill set is very centralized. So if you take away the thing that he's really good at, he becomes kind of a liability. So the thing that he's really, really good at is rim protection, defending at the rim. The thing that he's passable at is defending in space when he needs to. For an entire game though, not so much. Also, the rest of the defenders on the perimeter are, one, not very good, below average for the most part as a whole team. Obviously other than Royce O'Neal, like I said before, but they're not as good at staying in front of their defender because they're not very good perimeter defenders. Number two, they're not used to that. They never have to do that throughout the entire season. Like, it's probably very hard for them to make that mental switch in the playoffs when it happens to them where they have to do this now, not allow the drive and not stay up so tight on the perimeter. That's probably a habit that's really hard to change and catches them off guard for sure. And Gobert obviously isn't like a lockdown defender in space just because of how big that guy is. He's not crazy mobile, but like, he holds his own, I guess is what I'm trying to say, for the most part when he needs to. But the Gobert treatment that he's gotten the last couple of years and why the Jazz have gotten knocked out of the playoffs is they stretch out the defense in a way where the opposing team, they'll go 5 out. They'll usually go small. So there's nobody on the court for Gobert to defend that doesn't shoot. So everybody out there is a 3-point threat. So Gobert has to be pulled away from the rim. And so what they'll do is they'll keep Gobert away from the rim, stretched out on somebody, and they'll usually bring the offensive action over to the other side of the court, attack from the opposite side for the most part. Try to flank him in a way where it basically gives up the rim. Beating the Jazz has become so easy in the playoffs because it goes from them having unstoppable like rim protection for the most part to barely any rim protection at all, like some of the worst rim protection there is, because their whole entire thing is based on Gobert at the rim working. If you take that away, they don't have anything else to do. So it's a very smart thing that teams have started doing to them, and mainly something that the Jazz need to reevaluate in how they're structuring their defense and their roster as well, because that's probably not going to work much more in the playoffs, and they need some big wing defenders and guys to defend on the perimeter. And it also kind of sucks that they just gave Gobert the biggest contract in center history, I believe. I think he's the highest paid center in NBA history now, which is just nuts. But as I was saying, Joel Embiid is an elite rim protector as well, but the defensive system he's in he's like a last line of defense. He's not like the only line of defense. They have Ben Simmons, they have Danny Green, they have Matisse Thybulle, Tobias Harris, even big bodies, guys that can defend out on the perimeter for the most part. Ben Simmons being like one of the best ones in the league, Matisse Thybulle being one of the up and coming best ones in the league also. Danny Green's just, a veteran on that end, always going to be a really good guy on the perimeter in defense. Even the guys coming off the bench like Shake Milton, Furkan Korkmaz is also a pretty good like guard backcourt defender. He holds his own. So Joel Embiid doesn't get as much opportunity protecting the rim as most of those other guys, but his per capita or whatever you want to call it, I just thought of that. It's not called that, but like per possession or whatever, his scaled stats are some of the best in the league. It suggests that he would be very, very, very effective in that role also as a Gobert, Turner, and Capella and those other guys. So without Simmons in there, it doesn't necessarily kill your defense because you still have Embiid as a rim protector that works really well, especially during the regular season for those other teams. And on top of that, I'd say you still have a better defensive core around Embiid than those other teams have with their guys for the most part. Yeah, I would say so. Because especially like when Atlanta's rolling out a lineup of like Trae Young, Bogdan Bogdanovic, Kevin Huerter, Gallo, probably not all four of those guys at the same time. That rarely happens, I bet. Probably John Collins would be the next person, which again isn't like is much better than Gallo, obviously, but still not super great at point of attack. And then Capella holding up the middle. Like that's very bad. Like, you know, they do have big wing defenders though, like Hunter and Cam Reddish, even the young guy Onyeka Okongwu. You know, he's a guy that's going to be, you know, somewhat of a rim protector as well as defending in space, like kind of like a Bam Adebayo, you know, Swiss Army knife, or Ben Simmons, similar. That like prototype, not necessarily the same caliber. But the Sixers would still have Danny Green, which I guess isn't much, especially at whatever he is, like 34, 35 now, but you know, still somebody to defend. But Matisse Thybulle, you know, is going to step into that role really well on the perimeter to be that guy that thrives at defending on the perimeter, defending in space, being the primary point of attack defender that they're going to put on all of the opposing teams, like best scorers and guards and wings and whatever for the most part, other than like those really supersized wings like a Kawhi or LeBron. But he still might be their best bet, other than I guess maybe Toby in some cases. But I don't remember what I'm talking about. Do you remember? Simmons? Yeah, Thybulle was kind of redundant before being used in Philly because it was like, this guy is amazing at defense. He's like probably the best young defender, like best right out of college, right into the league perimeter defender that there has ever been. Maybe some would say, at least in this like century, other than maybe Kawhi. But again, they're just different. Kawhi was more physically gifted in a way that, you know, his frame and everything. Matisse isn't near as big, but just his hands. Matisse Thybulle is just such a skilled defender. It's ridiculous. I believe he has the highest jump shot block rate in NBA history, which is nuts. I believe it's like by a mile too. Like he's like double whoever's in second. But again, on a small sample size, he doesn't get like a ton of minutes. And that goes along with what I'm saying. He's been a redundant role with the Sixers his first two seasons so far because they have Ben Simmons on the team who does exactly what he does, but he's even a little bit more versatile because he's bigger and more experienced, I guess. And obviously gives more on the offensive end in terms of like overall potential and overall like ceiling. And also they pay Simmons a lot of money. So obviously they're going to play him a lot. But if Simmons is on the court, Matisse Thybulle doesn't really make much sense to be on the court also for the most part in most cases, unless there's really like a star-studded team that they're going against where there's like, you really want to lock them down and just go full defense mode. But having them both out there really sucks on the offensive end. It's going to be really hard to generate baskets. Thybulle's not a very good shooter. That's definitely something that he's been working on though. He improved a little bit in his second season, but you know, at least he actually attempts them as opposed to Ben Simmons. But Thybulle though, you know, he's not going to stretch the floor and he's not going to do anything else on offense really either, other than be a guy who cuts and stuff like that. He's an off-ball player. He's not going to do anything with the ball in his hands for the most part, other than maybe in transition or something. He's going to be relegated to a spot-up shooter or a cutter, which is what Ben Simmons also does off-ball. And Ben Simmons doesn't even shoot jump shots at all. So Thybulle takes them, but the defense is willing to give them to him most of the time. Simmons doesn't even take them, so they don't even bother guarding. So that destroys your spacing. And it's also two guys that just aren't going to be super good at doing much offensively with that spacing, especially. And again, it's something that's probably not going to be ever really needed, having them both out there on defense at the same time, for the most part. Having made my point, he's redundant. He could fill a void on lots of teams in the NBA, Thybulle that is. And one of those teams is a Ben Simmons-less Sixers team. So it wouldn't be like an unfathomable amount of pressure on Embiid at the rim if you got rid of Simmons, because there's guys that can step up and fill that role a little bit at least. But still, having a ton of Embiid rim protection isn't the worst thing. Obviously, I don't love it because of how not durable he's been his entire career. So, you know, putting more stress on him defensively, like putting more load, I guess, on his defensive plate is probably not the best idea. But at the same time, what Cat does bring to the defensive side of the ball is he's not a terrible rim protector. He's actually a decent rim protector in terms of just shot blocking, not necessarily in terms of guarding one-on-one a guy in the post. So he's best utilized, I would say, as a more of a roaming weak side rim protector. So that gives like a kind of a cushion of defense with Embiid, and it also prevents sense the other team doing the Gobert treatment to Embiid. Also, I forgot to mention before, the reason why we haven't really seen much of the Gobert treatment with Capella and with Turner, I think personally, is just because, number one, Pacers have not gotten far in the playoffs at all. They knocked out the first couple of rounds, or the first round in the last few years with Turner in that role, because the rest of the team isn't super good yet. And then with the Hawks, obviously this was the first year that they were in the playoffs, but every team that they ran across were teams that basically the only teams in the league that would never try that would never do things like that. They ran across coaches like Mike Budenholzer in the second round, or no, in the third round, sorry. Second round was Doc Rivers. First round was Tom Thibodeau. Yeah, it was the full platter of coaches that are not going to change anything about their schemes in the playoffs for the most part. So that's the reason why we haven't seen it really done to Capella and Turner, where they go 5 out and try to neutralize the threat of the rim protection, which leaves the rim as easy money for any of their guys to basically get past the perimeter defense and score at the rim. But anyways, the reason why I don't think that will work super well against the Sixers, at least not in the same way as it does against Gobert and the Jazz, is because the Jazz do not have anywhere close to like a weak side rim protector or anybody else that can actually rotate over and form some semblance of a shot blocker. Cat can definitely do that. Like, that honestly might be his best utilized defensive role, is being a secondary rim protector. So now, there's 2 guys out there that you have to sort of flank when you're going 5 out. If you do try that, you might have them both stretched out, but those are 2 guys that can rotate over to protect the rim when needed. And the defense can rotate and adjust if one of those guys does, fully commit to a drive to come over and help. Like, they have more freedom to do that then. And it's harder to beat, is what I'm trying to say, than simply pulling out the one rim protector that they have and flanking that and getting to the rim, because they try to get to a place where he can't possibly be able to help and rotate over. And if he does, it's going to burn them because they can kick it out to shooters and everything like that. But the Sixers having 2 guys that can do that can rotate over to help protect at the rim, makes it harder to avoid, and also makes it easier for the defense to adjust and rotate to not give up as many threes. So that's the reason why I think it works defensively. It's not ideal. Like I said before, their defense is not going to be as good as it was with Simmons, but it's not a bad defense, I would say, if Embiid stays healthy, which is a huge if, ginormous if. Also, the biggest if, honestly, is Doc Rivers making the defensive scheme like I'm saying, because typically Doc Rivers and I do not have the same ideas. But then obviously the big thing is offensively. So the other thing that Jacob said was it's not much of an improvement offensively, which I disagree with 1000%. There's no question. Like, the one reason you don't want to make that trade is the defensive thing, because you don't want to put too much pressure on Embiid at the rim, and Cat's not mobile enough in most cases for what most people would think of as a 4 on defense. But I would say there's guys that play 4 that nobody thinks or bats an eye at them playing on the floor in playoff games, playing at the 4. But I'd say they are even worse than what Cat could be at the 4 on defense. And that is a guy like Gallo, similar height, 6'10", versus Cat's like 6'11", 7 foot, something like that. But obviously Gallo he's a stretch big. He's a stretch 4. Defensively, he's not mobile at all. He's not even a weak side rim protector in any way. The things that he can do on defense is he is smart and has pretty good awareness, are the main things that, I'd say he has over Cat. His hands, maybe, to break up passes and get his hands on things sometimes, but he's not as mobile as Cat is, especially at his age now. Cat is much more physically gifted to be good at defense than Gallo is. That's not even a competition. If Gallo was on the Sixers, people would call that a good move, but people don't think of Cat on the Sixers as a good move just because he's a center who's known to be bad at defense. But if people knew more about what Karl-Anthony Towns does on offense and defense, really, the way that he's built, he's not just this big 7-footer that doesn't move. He runs the floor really well. He's really good in transition. If you watch Cat highlights, a lot of them are in the open court, running the lane, getting dunks, handling the ball, like going coast to coast type stuff. Not as much as like Simmons or Giannis, obviously, but that he has that in his repertoire. He's honestly one of the best shooting bigs in the league. He's probably on a similar level as Gallo as a shooter. Gallo isn't near as mobile to get open and create space and, create his own shot type of thing on the perimeter as Cat is. The only thing in Gallo's bag at this point in terms of shot creation is standing far enough out that the defense isn't super close on him. So he does have a little bit of space to just fire off 35 footers every once in a while. And that's not super efficient offense. But the other thing is high post, mid-range post up, turnaround fadeaway type stuff, where he doesn't have to be super mobile, but he's tall enough to just have that release over the defense where he gets it off pretty clean. And that's basically the only thing that he has. And, Cat has that too. Cat also has more mobility and more handles as well to create shots on all three levels and puts pressure on the rim. He's not afraid to attack the basket because he's not afraid to shoot free throws. He's a really good free throw shooter. I believe he's one of the highest free throw rate guys in the league as far as big guys go. Like, he shoots a lot of them, and he shoots them at a very good clip, mid 80s, I believe. So that's a huge step up, obviously. But yeah, the biggest thing is, like I said, he's going to be a floor spacer that really elevates Embiid's like offensive capabilities to another level. And if you're worried about Embiid being, used too much on the defensive end of the floor, expending too much energy as a rim protector. Number one, another thought I just had that might be good for him because maybe he might be more conditioned because he has more responsibility. But if you are worried about him having too much pressure on him or too much responsibility as the rim protector full time on defense and what that'll do to his durability and workload, Cat can alleviate a lot of Joel Embiid's offensive responsibilities or offensive workload. He can make Embiid a more efficient offensive player, a guy with, even less reps, which isn't necessarily what you want. But if you need to do it to conserve Embiid, that can be done in a number of ways with Cat on the offensive end of the floor. Number one, because Cat himself is a pretty decent number one option on a team to score. Like, he can create his own shot. Like I said, they can stagger their minutes even, so one of them is in at all times. And the other thing is, Cat makes everybody else on the court with the Sixers an even better, offensive creator or offensive threat as well too, because of his ability to stretch the defense and put pressure on the rim. He has space creation going both ways. Obviously not as much pressure on the rim as Simmons. Actually, I take that back. In the case of Simmons in the playoffs last year, even more pressure on the rim than Simmons had because Simmons wasn't doing anything. So guys that like last year that we saw kind of pop off as ISO scorers a little bit with the Sixers, Seth Curry, namely. Shake Milton a couple of years ago kind of came out in that way too. Furkan Korkmaz will probably get even more minutes with Simmons gone. Those guys will be even better in the roles that they play, and creating a shot will come easier to them because of the new opportunities that they have. Obviously, I didn't even mention Tobias Harris, who is literally their second option on offense. He's been that secondary shot creator even last year with Simmons, and really it kind of turned into Seth Curry as a third, or the tertiary shot creator, and Simmons was kind of relegated to a role player on offense. But yeah, Tobias Harris would get even better as well in terms of the stuff that he could do in isolation because of the threat of having Cat out there as well. It opens up a lot of things, I feel, personally, just because of the position that he plays and how good he can shoot. Just replacing Simmons with a guy that can shoot super well and isn't just a shooter. He's a superstar, honestly. Some people might not call him that, obviously, because he plays for the Timberwolves and they're not good at all. They haven't been good since Jimmy was there. Cat has not been on a good team, and Cat, I feel like, is one of those guys that's a very scalable player. He's not like a floor raiser, but he's kind of more of a ceiling raiser. Theoretically, this is hoop theory. We've never seen it happen because he's on the Wolves, other than, we did see it happen with the Wolves when Butler was there. And it was because Cat was kind of the secondary guy. He was a guy that was, he just elevated the play of Jimmy Butler, of their number one option, because he was such an off-ball threat that it gave him so much space to create. But anyways, that's why I think that Cat on the Sixers could work. I never thought I would be making this argument, but I am. That'd be nuts if it does happen. But yeah, that was the theory of today's Hoop Theory episode. Cat on the Sixers, how it would work, what it would look like. I would say a lot better than what most people think, and also a lot better than what I initially thought, like right off the bat when I first thought of it. Like, the reason it doesn't sound right at first is because of what Cat is currently. But if you just put him in a different scenario, he becomes something else. And it's something that's like, it's entirely theoretical. It totally is. But it's compelling, at least in my eyes. It's actually not 100% theoretical because, like what I said, we've seen some semblance of it before with the Wolves back when they had Butler, but that in a very different way. But we've seen him be a guy who elevates the play of other offensive players when he has the talent around him to where he can. And he's starting to do it at the end of last season. He was in, and I believe if the Wolves start the season and go into the season with the roster that they have currently, I think you'll see more of it with him and Anthony Edwards, him and even Malik Beasley and D'Angelo Russell, if he's going to be healthy. Who else do they have? Pat Beverly, he's not going to be an ISO scorer, obviously, but I'm just trying to think of names of people that are on the team. But those guys are going to be the guys that score in isolation most of the time. Would be Edwards, D'Lo, and Malik Beasley alongside Cat, obviously. But yeah, we'll definitely see a lot of offensive potency out of the Wolves this next season, especially under Chris Finch for his first full-length season as head coach. I think he's a really good offensive mind. He kind of implemented the offensive scheme that we currently use in Denver with Jokic. So obviously I have a pretty good opinion of him. But yeah, that's what they've been doing with the Wolves lately, is doing a lot more two-man game with Cat, having him play off of other players on the team like Jokic does in Denver, doing a lot more handoffs, kind of initiating out of the post. Obviously not the same passer, not even in the same universe as Jokic, but Cat is still very solid, I would say, is how I would grade him. A very solid big man passer. That's probably a big thing that they've worked on this offseason because of how much we saw Chris Finch begin to utilize that last season. I'm sure that's going to be a big part of their offensive scheme this year as well. So wouldn't be surprised if the offseason was focused on developing those kinds of skills. But other than that, I thought the topic for this episode was pretty good. Hopefully it worked pretty well. But I'll be coming back at you with more of those episodes with Anthony and Jacob, hopefully very soon. Anyways, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Either one. This has been the Oscar Robertson episode of Hoop Theory, episode 1. So thank you very much. I will see you guys in the next one.